So this is kind of like where the early wins, the foundational part that Mike was talking about. Were you able to get tangible, intangible change and communicate this, and that came out of any F.A.I.R implementation that you might have done?
So, where's this?
Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So I was involved in a couple of programs in GSK where we normalized our experimental record, our legacy experimental record, which is 4 million records, which is about 12 years of work of research. And that was then provisioned for reuse and researchability. And by us normalizing and annotating those, augmenting those records through ontologies, we improved its searchability. Now, we didn't put an ROI on top of that. It was something we did and said, okay, this will improve searchability, because we knew it would, because we standardized the terms across the narrative of the experiment. And that was the important bit, because these were narrative reports, really. There wasn't much structured data in there. There was a lot more narrative of what scientists run. And the record set, we've got to remember, varies from, okay, some very well-written experiments to ones which are not so well structured, because we're never designed for reuse. And that's a critical component to take into account when you're doing this. But not to do it would have been a waste of effort. Yeah, it significantly improved the time for our scientists to find existing records. It wasn't a 100% solution. There's more work to be done on that, and that ontology enrichment was the key to it, but we just didn't have the funding from the business. Again, it's what's good enough to get us onto the next stage.
Okay, great. Nick, I know you didn't raise your hand, but I know you work on a lot of these projects and stuff. Is there anything in high level that you can kind of say, hey, we've done this and we've gotten really good results, or et cetera, with clients?
Yeah, I think I can call out the work that the F.A.I.R Plus project was an IMI project that was supporting quite a broad cross section of IMI projects that are run sort of as private public initiatives. And so eTox and eTransSafe were one of the sort of examples. Those projects particularly focused on safety data. And again, based on all the discussions that we had today, their goal was to make them fair enough, as we've said, and to improve the investment in the work before the project closed. And I would also add the point that it isn't just about the data itself. Maybe for another talk, is about the privacy aspects, because F.A.I.R doesn't necessarily mean open. It means about with the appropriate access rights. So with particularly those two ones, the eTransSafe involved patient level data. It was about mapping it up properly, as was mentioned, and also making it far more accessible to the right constituents and interoperable. And that certainly is one of the deliverables from F.A.I.R Plus. Hopefully, letting also, I think, about leaving aside a legacy, because it's one thing to do one sort of project, but it's also about training the trainers to make this a much more sort of normal process, one that can be prospective rather than retrospective.
Just want to add on to what Nick comments about there. Restriction of records is quite critical, especially in a large organization. We have numerous contracts with lots of different individual organizations and individuals, academics, CROs, other pharma companies, and restricting that data to whoever needs it to be is a critical component of F.A.I.R, and it's something which we struggle with. It's a very difficult thing to maintain and manage, and it needs to be addressed every time you look at. You're increasing your findability of your records, but should the people who are looking at those records see those records? Yeah. Sorry, I think
Michael, sorry, I was on mute.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Michael.
I was just going to say about unexpected returns. I think it's actually more tangible than intangible, but we were implementing and getting better information about complaints from our patients and doctors and so forth. And so we put a big program in place to really try to understand that and collect the data and so forth in that area. And it actually resulted in, hey, not just visibility and getting access to the data, but we've actually been able to improve some of our auto injectors pretty quickly based on, one thing was a better training to our patients on how to use the injectors, but then also improving the designs of the auto injectors themselves. So there was two results of, hey, the initiative was to be able to better understand complaint data and how to structure it. And then the result was we actually had tangible benefits from that.
Okay, great. Mike?
Yeah, I just was, it took me a little while to think through it sort of while we were talking, but there's a lot of your data infrastructure, I think, that you have to sort of, well, at least I'm thinking about, we implemented our platform that lets you, our specifically thinking about a high throughput genomic sequencing laboratory that's now generating FAIR data about their processes and their work as they're going in real time. And as a result of focusing on FAIR data and having RDF as the core data format and things like that, we saw that immediately a lot of the sort of older data processing infrastructure that was kind of slow, relied on kind of clunky ETLs. I mean, they're very good data scientists. It's not that the implementation was clunky, but they had to wait for pipelines of processing to complete. They had to have a series of steps unfold, and hours would pass until somebody at the other end would be able to make some kind of decision or think about how current operations are going in the laboratory. So as a result of focusing on having interoperable data, we were able to avoid all these ETLs and actually just, what do you want to know about the data right now? And that was immediately accessible to them. So that was pretty huge.
Sorry, can I just put
is that real quick? Go ahead, Richard, and then we'll
so
go to
then
Zet.
you'll have a clear ROI on that, because you can say, I've got rid of X number of data pipelines, X number of ETL processors. We've improved the transmission of the data because it's not taken us now 10 hours to process blocks of data into the next stage. So there's clear advantages in that.
Yeah, I was about to say the same thing, just not to pile on, but we implemented a data aggregation and synchronization infrastructure on NGS data, particularly. But NGS data exacerbates the issue, and of course it's very interesting data to mine and analyze. So we went from moving NGS data from the sequencers to the dry lab in 5 days to 3 hours. And there are lots of tangible outcomes and measurable things there that can be promoted. Like you can now do higher throughput screening through your NGS studies, because you're not having to your NGS sequences aren't as idle. They're not idle, right? Exactly. Yeah. So there are very, very tangible ways, and that starts, Mike, with what you said about getting infrastructure in place properly, and then F&A, right? Accessibility via the infrastructure, and then the findability, because you've got the right grip surfaces on the annotated data to surface it, to kick off your pipelines accordingly.
Yeah.
So, okay, Abhishek. So, again, lots of data curation, lots of effort. You know what it takes to take a substandard data set and turn it into something that's highly usable. Are you getting tangible feedback and results from your clients when you do this, and how is that interaction happen?
Yeah, no, quite a lot, and we, continuously learn from this. One of the frameworks that we have put out was a collaboration with a customer. They're a large pharma company focused on oncology, and we also shared this with Pistoia Alliance, and it has been received well so far. But at a high level, what we focus on is two problems. One is the findability problem, and once found, can you make it usable, right? This is mostly in the context of public data, but also very transferable to proprietary data, right? Richard, you were talking about the 4 million records, right?
Oh yeah. I want to bring up another knotty subject which sort of links into FAIR, is about modeling of data. Yeah. Now I've had my fair share of wrangles with data and how we've then tried to remodel data, and I've spent the last 8 years doing that. And maybe it's a conversation for another round table, but I think it's something which we'd look at is what is the benefit of modeling versus the cost of modeling versus the implementation of modeling, because it's incredibly difficult, takes a lot of resourcing for what value it gets. Now I can see where it's needed, yeah, and absolutely needed, but there are certain scenarios where is the best approach to this, and it'd be an interesting roundtable for that.
So, John, going back to this oncology, looking at the data, transcriptomic, single cell and such, and a sense of scale. In 1 year, they had access to around 33,000 samples across experiments, and 7,000 of them were what we would call fair, and other 32,000 were what would be fair enough. And so if that's the scale that we're talking about, right? Microarray, RNA-seq, single cell, such data sets that are in public domain. So and this was something that we came up with in collaboration with them, and so it's validated to some extent. So just for the findability piece, it would require around 20 hours a month, every month, to just find these, go to literature, go to Geo, PubMed papers, your advisor, you went to a conference, you found some paper. That alone, 20 hours per month for highly trained, very quote unquote expensive.
Again, you've got another ROI there, because you're immediately saying there's a cost saving in there, because they're not spending 20 hours now, they're taking an hour. Yeah. So you've got 19 more hours where you can then utilize them elsewhere.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then once found, that's when the harder part starts, right? Because you have to make it usable, because you go to and you have tar GZ file and FASTQ and CSV in one table and multiple tables, like the whole shebang, right? And that's where we have been able to demonstrate that for the really fair data, it would take more than 3,000 hours of highly trained data scientists, bioinformatics scientists to get the 75,000 samples to get to FAIR standards as defined by us, for better or worse. And for the 23,000 samples that just needed to be fair enough, our estimate that would save them a couple of thousand of hours, right, over a period of a year, right? So these are huge savings, right? And as a company, what our promise is that this proverbial urban legend that we hear about, 80% of the time is spent on data cleaning and 20 in analysis, right? Our promise is to flip this ratio, right? So that you can spend 80% of your time on analysis and doing cool stuff.
But this comes back to democratization of data, and who are the consumers of the data which is being generated? Is it the bench scientists who might not necessarily be the best people to do that, or more dedicated data scientists who are going to be reanalyzing that data? Yeah. They're all consumers of the data, and you've got to understand how that what your consumer base is, who is going to do what and what they want to do with it, which is another challenge as well.
So Richard, we are talking mostly to data scientists, bioscientists who are doing this meta-analysis. And one of the things that we talk about, there's a KPI breakdown, right? For someone who's a bench scientist who is generating one data set this week, her priorities are different, right? Just to get the data set out, good quality, makes to the slide deck next week, right? Yeah. But a data scientist who is going to do a meta-analysis on hundreds and thousands of samples, they have to solve a slightly different problem, which was not accounted upfront, right? And that's the hard part.
Which then comes back down to the modeling, which comes back down to it's all related. It's all related, and it sounds incredibly simple when we say fair. We are going to make our data fair. Yeah, actually, when you start looking into that, it's not that straightforward. Anyway, there's Max got his hand up, and then it's John, I think. Yeah.
Yep. Go ahead. So after you guys go, just so everybody knows, we'll start the Q&A from the audience. We have a couple questions. So go ahead, Mike, and then John.
Sure. I just wanted to mention something. It's definitely bleeding over to the more intangible part of the returns on FAIR projects. But I wanted to just comment, like, we like it or not, basically, like, this is the direction that scientific data is going. So
Oh, no question.
one advantage that I find when we look into projects that sort of, you know, you hear about a new project somewhere, or, you know, somebody's working on such and such over here. For example, the FDA in the United States is looking into ways of accelerating the licensing of LDTs and the approval of LDTs. And one of the ways they're looking into accelerating that is by accepting digital proof of research, right? And the way they're looking into accepting that data is this format called the biocompute object, and inside of that is FAIR data, essentially, right? It's there's provenance, which is the W3 Prov standard, which is tied up with FAIR data. If you are producing FAIR data, you're already in a position where, when projects that you didn't even know about come along, you're already prepared to interoperate with them, which seems sort of like trite. Obviously, AI is in FAIR, you know it's going to be interoperable, but it's a huge value. It puts you ahead of people who aren't thinking about this and people who haven't put the money into this. So I think that is an important value.
But that's a sale. That's a sell you've got to make. You're saying this is important because it's going to come along. You've got to invest now to be ahead of the game, and that is the difficult part, because it's immediately, oh, it's not the shiny AI ML that's going to solve everything for us. Yeah, this is the core of it. It's back to foundations. You don't build your foundations on shifting sand. You put proper foundations in, and your data is your foundation. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, John. We can't hear you, John, and it doesn't look like you're on mute, but we can't hear you. No. Okay, type it in the chat, and then we'll answer it. Let's go to the Q&A, and we have this first question. This has been an insightful discussion. Have any of the panelists have experience with federated data platforms? I ask because in healthcare, HIESs, ACOs, we have standardized ontologies and interfaces to ensure semantic interoperability across diverse data sets. Go ahead, Tiffany.
I was excited for this question when I saw it come into the chat. Thank you, Anna. I think the enthusiasm that I have around federated data platforms is the ability to create more robust machine learning models from these very large federated data sets. And we've seen a lot of really quick growth around healthcare and the creation of synthetic data, which can then be accumulated into these very large federated data sets to allow us to create much more robust models to help us treat and diagnose and investigate the patients and the diseases that we're most interested in. I think one risk, though, that I want to call out with federated data is the process, as we've mentioned several times on this call, has to be fair as well. It's not just the data, but with federated data, you have to have a lot of trust in the people that you're partnering in and the people that you're sharing your resources with, so that you can say, okay, we are following the same process. And because we trust each other in following the same process, we're then okay in combining our data and using it as a single data set. If you don't have that trust and you don't have that standardized process, potentially you could introduce bias into the models that you're then creating from this data.
That's a great answer. Is that?
Yeah, federated models have another issue in opting participants into it. Because sometimes alignment incentives can be misaligned, right? So people with or data generators with really interesting data sets that can improve any federated model might have no incentive to join or co-op the data into the federated model. So that's where I'm excited about private set intersection. We have private data sets intersecting to a federated model without actually giving away the data. And there's been a lot of advancements in other fields where privacy, differential privacy has enabled more co-option into federated models without giving away too much of the asset or any of the asset. You hear about mathematical guarantees being made on differential privacy and adversarial attacks on that to actually reveal the source data. So there's still a little bit of work to be done on achieving it, but there's incredible progress, and a lot of the stakes are very high in being able to do that. Like great global models, federated data, have incredible benefit to not just top line, but to society too. So it's a great question, and it's coming. It's a hot button topic, I think, for many industries.
Yep. Abhishek, I don't know if you want to touch on that one at all.
Yeah, no, we have dabbled with it very briefly. It was too much for us to dedicate any meaningful resource. So we stepped back. But I know of a company, so indirect experience, Anna, Rhino Health, which is in the space like healthcare data. Their focus is entirely on federated, and there are many other companies, but thought I would share that name.
Right. Anna's response to that was the SLAs between organizations are critical to address trust, but also there needs to be an acceptance of standard ontologies and interfaces that will be used within the federated platform form. Federated, virtualized platforms, they're both to be looked at seriously. We've had experiences with the virtualized approach where reduced overhead and support and things like that. So something to consider. In our space with multi-omics and stuff coming, this is going to become more and more critical as that data needs to come back together, the diverse data sets and stuff. So great question.
Like cataloging, you're absolutely right, John. At the very least, the cataloging and sharing column headers, should be standard. That's in order to join data sets. You have to at least that. Sometimes the problem with that is that you reveal too much of the source data in doing that, so you start to get hesitation and such. So it's not trivial.
No, it's not. We have another question. How do you address the what's in it for me question of bench scientists, data producers? Often the benefit is accentuated at the data consumers end of the spectrum. This is definitely a challenge in our industry. I can tell you right now we're dealing with this on how do we make it seamless for metadata contextualization, different approaches, et cetera, so that the scientists aren't overwhelmed with the burden of making their data fair, when we could come up with automated ways and et cetera, that would allow that at the front end, and then what could be done, to enhance that or augment along that data journey.
Whatever you do, just don't tell them you're going to delete their data. That's not always the best approach. If you don't annotate it, I'm going to delete it. Just don't tell the bench scientist. Okay, in small circles, raise some fear, but it's.
But it is a very good question. It's very real and pragmatic. And I think it's one that's being worked on. I know, Nick, you've probably been challenged with this, and the scientific software providers as well. Is, hey, at the time of data generation or acquisition, how can you make my life easier to automate contextualization, etc.
So you build it into your interfaces where you're doing the data capture. So you're getting at that system of engagement first. This is how I capture the data, and as they're the producers, and they're rightly saying that, oh, why should I work hard here because somebody else is going to benefit? Actually, it's the patient who's going to benefit. with a new drug. That's the
Right.
reason why you're doing it. Yeah. That's the reason why we're in this game together, is to build these new drugs. Yeah. Build these new therapies. So they are part of a bigger picture, and it's making sure that they're aware that they are a critical part in it. They're the starting point from where it all comes along, and they are part of a team which delivers this. And ultimately, it's the patient who benefits. And at GSK, we are very, very hot on that and delivering that message. Everyone knows it's the patient who benefits from this. We're all part of the team delivering that.
Okay. Tiffany?
Absolutely agree with Richard on this, giving the scientists the insight as to what their data is actually driving at the end in what we're providing to the patients, and the responsibility that they owe to the company as well as to the patients to ensure that their data follows these practices, so that everybody throughout, not only our organization, but all of our partners, all of our stakeholders can benefit from that data. I would also comment that data mesh as a organizational strategy is becoming more and more popular, which is putting more ownership on the data producers to, one, continue to own their data as the organization uses it for the lifetime of that data product, but also to giving them the responsibility of ensuring that people can use that data, and the people who are using that data are then going to the producer directly to say, hey, your data isn't fair and I cannot use it downstream, and making them have that accountability for the data that they're creating, and not just throwing it over to the fence to an IT team or throwing it in a data lake or something like that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that as well. Yeah, it's a very good point.
Mike?
Yeah, it's maybe a little bit boring of me to just also vehemently agree, but building it into the interface seems like the most realistic thing to do, right? Like it doesn't really, I think human nature is such that if people have two options and one of them is just much less friction for them, they're going to use that less friction option. So you have to invest in good user interfaces, in good data experience, right? So that people are, their urge is to use the system that is producing the FAIR data. And I think you have to just invest in that kind of working with human nature rather than against it. You know, provide them ways to generate that.
Keep it simple. That's the thing. Keep it simple, because
it has to be. Yeah.
The registration system, which I've just done, it was overly complicated. There was hundreds of attributes for the molecule which never were populated. Simplify it down, lower set of data, more critical. This is where the decision points are made. Makes it easier for the scientists to enter, makes its usability a lot simpler because it's there, and the use control master data management to ensure consistency. Get it at that system of engagement, then it flows through the other systems downstream. It's the way to do it.
All right. Yep. Abhishek, you're going to get the last word in on this. Time flies when we're having fun.
I know. So one, I want to acknowledge Aishwarya. Her question is very spot on, and it's a very important one. And I think, to be fair, the onus is on us and folks like us to address that. As an external vendor, right, we cannot take the position of being a benevolent dictator. That's just not an option for us, right? We cannot force anything at all. So our approach is very different. Our philosophy is very different, where we say, you do what you do, right? And to be honest, the the user experience of a scientist is not very delightful of putting data in something. It's nothing, like they do the work for nothing in return, right? And I think there's definitely a cultural component with that, but technology can be of immense help here, right? Where you type in hepatic carcinoma if you want to do, or HCC next week, but our ontologies will automatically link them together and know that they are the same thing, right? So you do what you do, but we will. So a delightful user experience is something that we owe this to the community, and by no means it's an easy problem, right? It's a very, very hard problem. But I think it's a very important question. Like, unless we answer that, a lot of the conversation that was at the top of the meeting, right, where what metrics, how do you translate that to C-suite? But I think the stakeholder is also a key stakeholder, is folks who are generating the data on a daily basis. It's not quite clear as what.
Yeah. So look, I was going to ask everyone, because we're kind of out of time, but we got a very good question come in from Ted. So I was going to say to everyone, you got 10 seconds. Tell me what your lesson learned around FAIR is, right? But this question came in, and I think it's a better question. So assessing data fairness from a technical standpoint is useful, at least to a certain extent. What about assessing an organization's readiness for FAIR from a cultural perspective? And we do this a lot. This is a great question. This might include data centricity versus application centricity, having the right expertise to verify data, scientific domain experience, proper data stewardship, et cetera. It would be great to hear everybody's experiences. So instead of asking that other question, what 10 seconds, 15 seconds from everyone, what has been your experience from a company readiness perspective, culture, et cetera? It's in the Q&A box if you want to read it. And whoever wants to go first, just start talking.
That's so tricky. You can't do it in 10 seconds. That's the problem. You can't.
You got to do it in 15, Richard.
15. What can I say? Large organization, it's incredibly difficult. Incredibly difficult. Each component of the processes is at different stages, and you are constantly shuffling along together, but you are hindered by the slowest moving part, and they're usually the most critical part. It is very difficult. There's no easy solution.
Okay. Is that
At Resilience, we're all in Agile, for better or for worse. So we're using Agile as our culture to progress us along our data maturity models.
I would say we're doing the same happening at GSK, but it is a slow process because you're trying to change the direction of a large organization.
Yeah. John, you've been in the large organizations,
Yeah.
Medium to large.
Yeah, so echo Richard's comments. I think one way is look for signposts along the way, and I describe a tipping point moment. So how close are you to a tipping point moment where the light bulb goes on collectively, and folks then jump on and go all in, and trying to find the signposts along that way, and we can talk about what those look like, but I'm sure everybody has seen some of that.
Yeah. I think the only silver lining in the pandemic has been that companies realized, oh boy, we're not in good shape to deal with this from a remote perspective, from a data perspective, from a systems perspective, et cetera. Tiffany, what do you think?
I would say that assessing a organization's readiness for FAIR, especially from the cultural perspective, has to do with collaboration. How willing is your organization to collaborate? I think that one of the hallmarks of FAIR is the ability to collaborate either internally or externally. I've seen in my consulting career organizations that scientists themselves absolutely refuse to work with each other, even if they're in the same building, the same lab. At AstraZeneca, I haven't experienced that same culture. We're highly collaborative, not only internally, but externally as well. And I think that's going to be a key component for ensuring that any FAIR initiative is successful within an organization.
Then you've got
the
problem of that you're highly collaborative, and then trying to get you're trying to get your own ducks in order with everybody else's ducks from other places in order. So it's a challenge.
It's hard.
Yeah, it's
where
hard.
the agile mindset comes in to play too, as is that.
But what's going to give you the best amount of value? It's about Agile is a great methodology, and it's really good, and you're adapting to changing needs of the customers. But actually, they're constantly changing, and you are constantly readapting, and you are always playing catch up to a little degree at some point.
It's a challenge.
That's conversation.
Yeah.
Michael Shano. Thanks, Tiffany.
I guess I would just kind of summarize it as change management, which change management 101, but sometimes, and I'm going to use like terms that probably aren't right, but force people to do the right thing, and trick. And not that it has to be bad, right? Everybody's goal is to make our lives easier, make our jobs easier. But I had a conversation about like digital transformation yesterday, and if you think about all of the different areas where we're forced to use our smartphones in our everyday lives, and we've been forced to do it, right? Venmo payments to friends, parking in the streets, right? If you have to basically download an app to pay for parking in a street, and we've been forced to do it. So we've got to make things easy and fun, but sometimes, people get so used to how they're doing their jobs that even the
Yes.
easiest thing that makes it sounds very valuable to us, getting scientists and individual contributors and so forth to actually change, sometimes we
Right.
have to almost
So
innovatively
it's the word lead, right? It's the
Yeah.
word lead in leaders. And that's exactly what you're saying. You have to be a leader and you have to know how to lead to get those great outcomes. So John's seen that, you've seen that, others on this call. Nick?
Well, yeah, lots of great comments already. I would add the one about the keeping the business questions in focus all the time, because without that end goal of what are you doing it for, I think this can be too much of a sort of theoretical exercise.
Yep, agreed. Abhishek, you want to say something and I'll get the last word.
Yeah, no, thanks, John. No, Nick, I agree with Nick, right? I think this all has to be translated into, some, compelling business case. Do you save days to go to the R&D application, or if you're a scientist generating data on the bench, what does it mean for you, right? That is a key part of this conversation that needs to be addressed. But overall, like before we hand it to you, I really want to thank you for putting this together, and this was fun conversation.
No, it was great. And we're gonna have several more of these because there's so much to cover. I will say that you need to do a health assessment of your organization before you step into some of these things. And that is, how does your senior executive team make decisions? Are they consistent? Do stakeholders really mean anything in your organization? Do you get somebody from the business or for IT and you're counting on them when things start to go bad or get rough, or do they disappear? You have to really understand the alignment, the stakeholder alignment, the business alignment, everything. There's a lot to this. And if you do it right, you're going to come out the other end. Michael, you were talking earlier, the cost of doing something. I can tell you, we've done the assessments. The cost of not doing it is astronomical. It could be missing a blockbuster discovery in your organization, or a major failure in your organization that costs you, millions of dollars, etc. It's all out there. We've seen it, and we've evolved to this point for a reason. I wonder sometimes, I've said this multiple times, if we had fair data environments throughout our research organizations, our government, academia, and then we were hit with the pandemic, could we have gotten it through it without all the misinformation? Could we have gotten it through 50% faster? I don't know the answer to that, because science is science, and things happen even at a certain rate. But I feel that a lot of things wouldn't have happened during that, and we would have been much better off as humans coming out of that. And the same is going to be true for new drug discovery and new therapy discovery. So we'll get there faster for our patients, our loved ones, etc. And I just think there's so much to gain from doing this, and to do it right. And this has just been a great conversation. And I look forward to the next ones where we can dig into some of the other issues and problems.
Okay.
Thanks,
All right.
everybody.
Thanks, John. Really appreciate it. Take care,
Great
everyone.
job, everybody.
Bye now.
Thank you.